Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest of our series of podcasts from Oxford Economics. I'm Gabriel Stein, Director Asset Management Services, and I'm sitting here with one of our economists, Nafez Zouk, and we are going to talk about what I call the Turkey-Russia-Syria nexus. Over the past few months, we have seen Russia intervene militarily in Syria, ostensibly, although perhaps not actually, against Islamic State, while Turkey, the intervention of which has been fairly lukewarm, is also an enemy of Islamic State, has shot down a Russian plane, and this has led to a war of words and sanctions between Russia and Turkey, thus amply proving the truth of the Middle East dictum, the enemy of my enemy is also my enemy. Nafez, you have put out a viewpoint and done a webinar on this. Russia has imposed sanctions on Turkey. Let's by the way say we're leaving some of the geopolitics aside, though I'm sure we'll touch on that, but we're looking at the economics of it. Russia has imposed sanctions on Turkey. Is this real? Is it serious? How important is it?
Well, thanks, Gabriel. Well, that's exactly what we've been arguing, actually. It is a serious imposition in terms of the damage to their economic relationship, but the material effect of these sanctions, we think, is going to be limited and containable if the sanctions are applied in their current form that they've been announced and they're not aggravated further. I think the effects will be skewed against Turkey. Turkey has more to lose from these sanctions, primarily through the tourism channel, because as you know, Russia sends a lot of second largest number of tourists to Turkey, which obviously contributes to an improvement in its current account balance. But the trade aspect of these sanctions is not that severe. It has left out some of the other more higher added value goods that Turkey does send to Russia.
Such as what? So Turkey exports tourism to Russia, as it were. What else do they
Exactly.
export?
So they export tourism, but when you look at the product mix of the goods exports to Russia, about 20% of that is food, essentially fresh fruits and vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of it, so about 40% of it is manufactured products, and a lot of this has to do with car parts or parts related to the automotive industry. Machinery and transport equipment also form another 25% of exports from Turkey to Russia. And then you have all the textiles and clothing and these kinds of things.
So which of these have been exempted from sanctions?
So far the sanctions apply only to fruits, vegetables and meat. So for the food. So that 20% has been sanctioned. Now, obviously, we're hearing stories of delays at borders and this kind of checking goods as they arrive into Russia at ports and border crossings. That will obviously maybe slow some trade down. And then you have on the services side a lot of Turkish construction companies that operate in Russia where for the Sochi Olympics or other projects that are due to happen, the World Cup, for example. Now,
assuming it happens.
Assuming it happens.
So let me get this straight. So approximately a quarter of Turkish exports are affected. How big are Turkish exports to Russia?
That's a good point to bring up. The reality is that the relationship, the export channels have been slowing down for two reasons. The first is that Russia is in a crisis and a recession, which is consumer led. So the demand for Turkish goods has been falling. Now, this year, Turkey's exported 4% of its goods to Russia. So that's about $2.7 billion worth of goods. It's one of the top 10 trading partners, but it is nowhere near one of the largest.
Okay.
On the other hand, the fall in consumer demand from Russia probably means that a lot of Turkish exporters must have had time to start repositioning themselves away from the Russian market as this extension of the recession goes into a year next year.
So essentially, we're talking about the maximum hit to Turkish exports equivalent to about 1% of GDP on goods, but the services sector, particularly the tourism side, likely to be worse hit.
Exactly.
And the impact, therefore, on Turkey, weakening of the lira.
So what we've done a couple of analyses. We've done a few quick model simulations with these numbers, just plugging them in. Assumptions such as zero growth in tourism, no more food exports, and these kinds of things. And the effect on GDP ends up being something like 0.3 to 0.5% lower. That's manageable. The bigger effect is on the current account. So there we see something where the current account is widened by about 0.5%. Now for Turkey, that's a big deal because already the current account is large and already it relies on...
How large is it?
Well, it's going to hit... It was about 5.8% last year.
Okay.
This year around 5%.
So it's quite a significant...
And it relies on short-term flows for financing. So that would be a tricky part. And then, as you say, the lira probably reacts by weakening. And so...
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a big deal, but not that big, especially when you think that the tourist season in Turkey starts in May, June.
Who knows what might happen by then?
Exactly. So we're looking at half a year of hits and not, before that it should be still containable.
Let's look at it from the other side for a moment, because one of the things we've seen with Russia's behavior vis-a-vis Western Europe and or let's say vis-a-vis the EU, because it also involves Central and Eastern Europe, has been wielding or threatening to wield the energy exports weapon. And of course, Turkey is not imposing sanctions on Russia, but I assume Turkey is a buyer of Russian gas and oil. So how much do they buy? And has Russia made any noises about curtailing energy exports to Turkey?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, the fact is that Turkey is Russia's second largest customer for gas. Really?
Who's the biggest?
Germany.
Oh, okay.
And so about 13% of Russia's exports go to Turkey. Turkey has the largest share in Russia's largest share in the Turkish market. About half of all of Turkish imports are energy related. Let's not also forget wheat and oil, other products. So I think on the energy side, Russia does have more to lose in the sense that it would be losing a major customer at a moment in time when other major customers are questioning their gas dependency on Russia, such as Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And so I think it would be a bit of a risky move for the Russians. In that sense, on the energy side, they have more to lose. Granted, for Turkey too, it wouldn't be easy to secure new sources of energy without significant additional costs. So, storage and pipelines for gas aren't easy to procure elsewhere.
No, but it strikes me that one possibility would presumably be to buy gas from the Mediterranean, from Lebanon, from Israel, from Egypt, where there are now very large
Algeria,
fields, as we know, Algeria, and perhaps even Cyprus. Perhaps this might lead to some kind of rapprochement between the Turkish and Cypriot governments.
I mean, that being said, though, we have seen Russia's ability to shoot itself in the foot previously, and I think it would be difficult for them to do it this time, but it is a major risk. And really, one of the reasons why we're still not completely negative is because we don't see that materializing yet on the energy side.
Now let's stay for a moment with Russia. So we've talked about the impact on Turkey of these sanctions, but there is presumably also an impact on Russia if Russia stops. I'm not talking so much about the tourism side, although it does look as if the Russians are slowly being stopped from traveling anywhere where there is sun and sand and water and so on. But if the Russians stop importing food from Turkey, presumably, unless they replace those imports from elsewhere, there will be an impact of that as well.
Well, this is something that Russian officials have already recognized, and part of the reason why the sanctions come into effect actually only in January 1st of next year is because they wanted the Russians to continue having all of their imported fruits and vegetables in time for New Year's and Christmas. So 25% of Russia's supply of fruits and vegetables comes from Turkey. Food inflation has been a major driver of the inflation that we've seen in Russia in the past year since the sanctions, and therefore we would expect something like a 0.4 percentage point increase in inflation in Russia next year, which we've already reflected in our forecast, because it's not directly obvious how fast you can replace your supply of these kinds of things. I mean, obviously Morocco, Azerbaijan could be alternatives, but in the short run at least there would be a spike in inflation. And this is a bit of an issue because we saw the central bank today in Russia hold its rates for the third time in a row this year, having wanted to start lowering by the end of this year. But, inflation hasn't really come down, and this is risking a further spike in Q1 and a bit of Q2 next year.
Now, I said earlier that we weren't going to talk about the geopolitics, but of course I'm aware that you did a webinar together with our partner Control Risks. Let's look briefly at this. We have two leaders, Presidents Putin and Erdogan, both of whom, neither of whom is the shy retiring type, let's say, to be polite. Where do you think this is going to end up? Will it be a lot of bluster and eventually things will settle down, or is there a danger of escalation? And that, of course, assumes that there's no further incident on the ground.
I think most of the analysis that's been done so far assumes that there will not be further military escalation, at least not between the two countries directly. It's become clear that NATO and Turkey are on the same side, and that NATO is effectively part of Turkey. Maybe this is what the Russians were looking to test. On the other side, the schism between their positions in Syria is getting wider and wider. So the bottom line solution is what happens in these Vienna talks. What happens in Riyadh with the...
These are the talks on some form of ceasefire or political solution
in Syria, exactly, because I think this is really the only way out. But on the other side, you need to think about the fact that ISIS is not the only enemy that the Turks have in Syria, and more so they're becoming concerned with the Syrian branch of the Kurdish forces along their border. Now, this is something that the Russians would be very willing to support, to be a thorn in Turkey's side should things deteriorate. So we could see an increase in this low-level kind of rebel violence within Turkey and around Turkey's borders, but I don't think a direct military confrontation between the two powers is what will happen.
And politically, as I said, lots of bluster and hopefully easing in the spring?
I really have a hard time seeing any easing. I think both sides are entrenched pretty deeply now at this point. It could get to the point where we have something like a short-term solution that allows some form of power transfer, which would be unfavorable for Turkey, for example, but favorable for Russia and Iran. So we'll see.
Well, the Middle East will remain a topic that I'm sure we will return to time and time again. Meanwhile, thank you very much, Nafez. Thank you everyone for listening. And we will, of course, return with future podcasts in coming weeks. Thank you very much.